We always look at the silver lining, right? And the silver lining goes back to the beginning of our conversation, which is what is the story that you tell? And as you're talking about this, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Maybe you can share with us your silver lining. But I feel like because of your dad, through this process, you had to learn to open up. You had to learn from looking from the other person's point of view. You had to learn to be tenacious. You had to learn to keep following up. And I believe those attributes is what made you successful today.
100%. So it was partly those attributes that I received from him. And then I think really the silver lining for me came down to the allowance of me to really own who I am and open up in a way that I actually allowed myself to be seen in the way that I want to be perceived. Because early on in our relationship, one thing he did tell me, and I remember being so aggravated about it because it was maybe the third or fourth time that I had seen him after we already started communicating, and he was like, you put up a wall for people and you just don't really lower it down. And I was just like, who does he think he is? And I had this like agitation towards it. And then eventually I was like, well, when I sat down and really looked at how I was acting and how I was being perceived, I could kind of see where he was saying I have a wall up, because it was very much how I was operating. And that wall came from, in my case, it felt like a protection mechanism. And inherently growing up as a single parent's child, for me, any new area I went to or a new environment, I was definitely the person who would first scope and watch people and interactions and kind of make the scenario of, is this safe for me to even come out, or should I just stay in my little corner and that's where I feel safe? And so it's very easy to go back into that route of having a wall up and not being open and not allowing people in. And so through this relationship, I learned to start breaking out those tile by tile. And while there are still situations where I do find myself having to wall up, I realized that the tendency has gone far lower because I'm able to know who I am outside of the stories, the beliefs, the experiences I've had that were cultivating that past version of myself.
And when you have a wall up, it's a protection mechanism, exactly what you said, but it blocks out all the bad people, but it also blocks out the good people. You mentioned about Ponohono in the beginning. For some of our audience don't know what that is. Can you share with us what that is? And number one, number two, how did you do it? Like, what were some of the results afterwards?
I will be very transparent in saying that the first time I heard about Ho'oponopono, I was literally the person who was like, I am not doing this because they have not asked for forgiveness, so why should I forgive? It was very much that standpoint of not wanting to take the ownership. And so the first time I did it, it was actually through a course I was taking back in 2020, and she had us walk through the exercise, and I remember literally having to sit with that exercise for an extra 15-20 minutes before I could get myself to do it, because I had so much resistance to the forgiveness and to owning it, and I really had to kind of pace into it, is the way I'll put it. And the first time I did it, it's basically an ancient Hawaiian prayer, and the prayer in order is pretty much, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you, thank you. And that second line of please forgive me it was one of the biggest triggers you could have ever told me, because I was like, what do you have to forgive me for? Like, excuse me. And so the first time I did it, I can honestly say it was effective in that I felt a little bit of relief from the need of, it was a layer of forgiveness, I'll say. But because I went into it pretty much going in with this mindset of, why do I need to be the one to ask for forgiveness? It was not as potent as what it could have been. So I decided, because I recognized, and at this point I started doing the work on myself, I realized if I want to reach this next level of owning who I am, and if I want to create the abundance, the success, the love, all these attributes that are what everyone's pretty much searching for in their lives, I need to go ahead and really hone in on this forgiveness work. And so I did it again, and the second time it started to feel a little bit better. And I distinctly remember getting to a point where third time around, when I started realizing, and the person who I was in the relationship, and the texts and the calls and the emails, there was some things I could probably ask for forgiveness for, because humans are humans and we all need time to sometimes watch how we are communicating with others. And something Tony Robbins always says is 80% of the relationship, or 90%, excuse me, is selection of the person, but it's also selection of the person you are in that relationship. And until I heard that, it did not really land, but I started to realize there was aspects of myself that needed to do the work as well. And it's easy to put yourself on a high horse and say, I'm the victim, or I'm the person who was harmed in this situation, or they should have done this and this and this. To have all these walls, then to realize that no, the way I'm showing up is not the greatest. Continuing to blame is not the greatest, and taking ownership of that. So after a couple more rounds of it, I started to peel back these layers, and I could start feeling myself actually crying and feeling the feelings of forgiving him. And it was this journey of finally getting to a point where I could honestly say that there was, I wouldn't say I was perfectly healed from it, but it got to the point where I could actually understand his standpoint and understand who he is as a person when you take out all those stories and those beliefs and just see him for who he is as a soul face value.
That's so beautiful that you mentioned that. Can you elaborate a little bit more about the selection process?
90% of a relationship is selection of not only the person, but who you are in the relationship. So for me, I realized there was aspects of who I am that's not necessarily showing loving daughter in this context. And it was, you know, maybe getting irritated at the small things, or not taking the time to actually follow up with, if I had a concern about him, I would kind of sometimes brush it off and be like, okay, he's got this. Or there was aspects of like, we had a plan to meet and he was running late. I would start getting irked about it. And again, it goes back to those stories. And it was the version of myself that was being daughter that I did not want to be perceived as. Still had a little bit of immaturity is the best way I'll put it. And I realized I had to select the version of myself that was a little more forgiving, more willing to be flexible, which is a big part of just life in general, and having that adaptability. So really this relationship ended up being kind of a catalyst for me to understand a lot of life lessons. As much as it's triggered me and made me grow, it's been also probably the relationship I've had to grow from the most.
So beautiful story. Such a beautiful story. Thank you so much. If there's one advice you want to share with all the parents out there who are going through their own version of the struggle with forgiving their parents, what would it be?
I would say the biggest thing I had to realize for me personally is, especially dealing with immigrant parents on both ends, a person is doing the best that they can with the information they have at the time. And a lot of these parents that we've had, and I can say this on both ends of my parental history, especially with the immigrant background, but even if you don't have the immigrant background, you have to realize that the generational trauma gets passed down from one generation to the other, and it's a cycle until someone finally says enough. And so I would look at even the cycle on my mom's side of certain habits and situations, and I'd be like, well, how they treated their kids is wrong, or how they are parenting is wrong. And I realized after really having some deep conversations and even opening up that wall back to hearing my mom out, really having these deeper conversations with my grandparents and kind of understanding they did the best what they could with what they knew. And then also they didn't really know any better. It's a cycle, right? So like I said earlier, until a person finally gets to the point where it's like, our generation, we're not doing this anymore, those tendencies can fall back, whether it's maybe you have yelling and screaming in the home, or different ways of punishing children, spanking, etc. These are all tendencies that they were just getting passed along, and it's normalized, unfortunately. So once I hit that realization that once you know that they're doing their best, and some of them just didn't realize that there's other ways of being, and they didn't realize that things can be done differently, especially if it's a cultural norm, whatnot. These all play a part into it. So at one point you kind of just have to understand that the dynamic, while it might not be okay, it doesn't mean it has to stay a cycle for you to continue on. You can choose how you continue to parent. You can choose who you become as a parent for your child and what dynamics you're going to play out for them. if it didn't work in the past, it doesn't mean it has to be something that you automatically pass down.
Yeah, when we choose what we want, we take that ownership back. We take that responsibility back. We take that accountability back. We are the onus of the relationship, and we're no longer blaming. We're no longer being pulled on, 20 million different directions. And it's really coming back to kind of summary recap. What you talked about is, our parents, they're doing their best that they could. They just don't know what they don't know. But it starts with us, because the buck stops here. And now that you guys listen to this, we're starting to bring awareness to this. We like to invite you to start the process of your own forgiveness, whatever that looks like for you, whether it's through Ho'oponopono, whether it's through understanding, whether it's looking from a different perspective, stepping inside their shoes, whatever that is for you. We love to invite you to that process. This has been one of the awesome conversations I have had, and this is a much needed conversation to have had, because just about everybody I talked to, and when I did executive coaching in the past, everybody has some form of intergenerational trauma. And I love it because it goes full back circle to the original quote was, we blame our parents for their parents' fuck up. Once you understand that concept, then we can start the forgiveness process. Thank you so much, Anita, for your time and your nuggets of wisdom, and we got so much out of it. I hope you guys listening to this go back and listen over and over and over. I know I will, because I'm also part of that journey as well, forgiving my parents as well. Thank you so much for bringing your presence, your light, and your love, and just everything about you, Anita. I'm so glad that, actually, what you guys don't know is we had to reschedule this quite a number of times, and I think the last period of 2 or 3 months or something like that, but it's better late than never. So thank you so much, Anita, for being on our show.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy that I was able to serve.
Until then, live purposely, love passionately, and be the most remarkable parent that you can be. We'll see you future episodes.